So what the goal will be that whenever there are elements throughout the sites, maybe in common areas or something like that, to look for elements that protrude no more than 4 inches. If they do, there are different techniques and simple ways of addressing these elements by placing a cane detectable element below them. Think of a planter or something like that, or something that will not be moved easily, to avoid having these elements as protruding objects. Another requirement is for, and this is following the line of the following the accessible routes, is the curb ramps. And these we'll see often, many times, basically provided when people have to navigate through curbs and when people need access from parking spaces into sidewalks and then to the facilities. So the main premise here is to basically provide a slope that is no more than 1 in 12. 1 in 12 is a ratio. Basically, that is that for every inch of rise, you need a horizontal projection or a distance of 12 inches. So in 1 foot, it will rise 1 inch. As simple as that. 2 feet will be 24 inches, 3 feet, 36 inches, and so forth. Now, that is a maximum standard that is set. Nothing is to say that we design and build these elements with a lesser slope. And actually, the requirement calls for it to be the least possible slope. So many times we will see that some elements are right around the requirement, but they shouldn't be that. When we have a requirement that is like this, that is setting a maximum, we should design well below this and have these elements so that they are fully compliant. Otherwise, if we try to design with or exactly at the requirement, it is likely that we can fail and the elements will be non-compliant. So, it's best to try to avoid designing at that 1 in 12 slope, but try to do it a softer slope, something definitely less to avoid being in non-compliance. And specific requirements for the curb ramps, not only, well, the main slope is 1 in 12, but the flare sides, in occasions when there are landings on top that are at least, basically 48 inches, are allowed to have a 10% running slope, a 1 in 10%, which is a higher slope than this. But as I said, these slopes are maximum, and we should design well below these to avoid being in non-compliance. At the same time, as you can see in that diagram on the lower left-hand corner, that just indicates the relationship between the 1 and the 12, what I mentioned, the change between the rise and the length of the ramp. And surfaces that are adjoining these ramps similarly should have no more than 5%. So if you think of a curb ramp for a parking space or something like that, that slope at that gutter should be no more than 5%, because otherwise the transition from that 5% to a 12% creates an area that can easily catch, well, a coaster, for a wheelchair can get trapped in that area, and somebody can basically tend to tip and move forward and fall off their wheelchair. Now, continuing with accessible routes, ramps become parts of accessible routes, and they have to follow the same requirements that accessible routes basically be the 36 inches long, 36 inches wide minimum, and that have no more than 2% cross slope. Now, ramps have to follow the same requirements for the curb ramps, that they have to have that 1 in 12 maximum slope. And because these ramps are sloped surfaces, what we will find is that there is a heightened requirement, that is to install handrails at these ramps. So we will see that for surfaces that rise over 6 inches or that are over 72 inches in long, they have to have handrails. And the handrails go on both sides of the ramp, not just on one. And this is one of the elements that we will see, and even in the pictures ahead, that tends to have problems, for some strange reason, the design or the construction, a lot of these elements get left out and they don't have the handrails. Either they don't have it, they don't have the extensions, or they don't have handrails on both sides. But it is something that is quite common, that, as we will see. And there are some diagrams, as you can see. The height of the handrails should be, and there are some differences, but in UFAS it specifically requires that height be mounted between 30 to 34 inches above the finished floor to the top of the gripping surface. we'll see that the ADAAG requirement is between 34 to 38. So that's how these requirements vary from one standard to the other. Also, the handrail itself, the diameter should be 1¼ to 1½ inches in width, and also it has to have extensions, basically 12 inches long at the end, at the top, and at the bottom. Another specific requirement for ramps is that once they rise over 30 inches, they are required to have a landing, and that landing, depending on if it is in just in one direction, it can be as wide as the ramp leading to it. Now, when you change directions, that landing has to have the 60-inch turnaround space that we have spoken in the past, so somebody in a wheelchair can actually wheel up to that landing, make the turnaround, and wheel to the opposite direction, basically to take the switchback or the other portion of the ramp. So the concepts of the building blocks of that turning space, they start repeating themselves throughout these elements. Okay. Another important element is doors. We'll see that the specific requirement under the UFAS for doors is that they have a 32-inch clear minimum width, and that is measured from the stop to the edge of the door. So it is a clear dimension. So basically what happens is that many times maybe an architect or a contractor will go ahead and spec out a 32-inch door, will not provide a 32-inch clearance because of the door jamb and the door width and all that. So basically you have to start, with 34 inches or more, or 36 inches to have that 32-inch clear minimum width. There are specific requirements regarding the hardware. It's supposed to have the lever type hardware, and also the threshold, which basically the threshold should not vary more than 1/4 inch vertical in height, and it can go up to a 1/2 inch, but it has to be beveled in a 1:2 ratio. Only sliding glass doors, I believe, are allowed a little bit more, but that's not the case in most cities, and especially in Florida. Our sliding glass doors usually tend to have a higher threshold than that 1/2 inch and 3/4. So another requirement for the doors is that they have what is called a maneuvering clearance. And so we are all on the same page with the maneuvering clearance. The maneuvering clearance requirement, what it is that think of this as you approach a door. When you approach a door, if you are going to open that door, and let's call this on the pull side, means when you are opening, when you're holding that knob and you are pulling it towards you. So at that point, you have to, let's say, get out of the way to be able to open that door. So for a person on a wheelchair, when opening a door, and we could also think of somebody on a walker, if you're pulling that door, you have to put that walker or that wheelchair clear out of the swing of that door to be able to open it all the way, and after it's open, be able to move in and go through that door. So based on that, and that is the diagram we have on the lower right side of the well, actually on the upper right side, there is a specific requirement that it must be 18 inches clear on the latch side. Basically where the hardware is, you need 18 inches minimum clear for somebody to be able to move out of the way of that door, open the door, and go through that door. That's the general idea. Now, there are different requirements for the maneuvering clearances. I'm just going to go basically over the first two, the ones that are mostly used, which is the other one is the push on the push side. So that is if you're opening a door and pushing it again away from you, not towards you, but away from you. So in that case, when doors have both a closer and a latch, the doors are required to have 12 inches on that push side. That is basically from where the door ends, 12 inches, and that's on the side of the where the hardware is located, where the knob is located. So it should have no less than 12 inches. Again, these are minimums. Now, if the door does not have a closer, it does not have a latch, it's not required to have that. But in general, again, we should try to at least meet these minimum standards. Now, there are additional maneuvering clearances requirements for, because these two that we're talking about is when it is a forwarded approach to the door, when somebody is walking directly towards that door. There are additional requirements when somebody is walking parallel to a door and will pull that door open or push it open. And at that point, there's just a big series of options that are available for that and requirements that have to be met, but those basically, it's just best to refer to the book than to go every single one of them because they're very complicated. Trust me, I've been looking at this for so many years and I still don't have them all in my mind, so that is definitely the best way to go, just to use a book and pretty much look at what the specific requirement is depending on the type of approach, because it can be either, it changes if it's on the hinge side, if it's on the latch side, and if it's on the pull or push, so they're just combination, options. So it's just best to look at the specific requirements. Okay, now, as I mentioned before, UFAS, and the main difference from the ADA requirement is that UFAS sets specific requirements for the dwelling units, and more importantly, for bathrooms and kitchens. So we are going to look at the specific requirements for the bathrooms and for the kitchens, and also for all the common spaces and facilities serving these accessible dwelling units. So think of it, if a unit will have accessible a parking space for it, it has to be accessible. If it has a mailbox, it has to be accessible. The clothes drying line that's in the backyard has to be accessible. So all these features that are related to that accessible dwelling unit must in turn also be accessible. Or even if there is think of it as a common laundry area, but it is the one that is designated for an accessible dwelling unit, then it should also be accessible. Excuse me. So the intent is to provide an accessible route to connect all these spaces and elements, and that goes back to the basic blocks that we had spoken about in the past of the accessible route, the width, the cross slope, and running slope. Okay, so now for the specific dwelling units, what we will see is that at least one full bathroom, including a lavatory, a toilet, a water closet, tub, or shower must be accessible. And basically that means providing one water closet with all the grab bars with the clear flow spaces, the lavatory mounted at the proper heights with clear flow spaces, and tubs or showers also at accessible heights and with the requisite dimensions. Also, for the sleeping areas in these units, basically what the requirement is that if it's a one-bedroom unit, that one bedroom must be accessible. If it has at least 2 bedrooms or more, then at least 2 bedrooms must be accessible. And by saying that it will be accessible, basically you have to have the requisite door width, the closets inside of them have to be accessible, hardware, and different elements also that we will see. Now, UFAS does allow for adaptability, and the concept of adaptability is reached by leaving the features in the units before the residents move in, and allowing for certain adaptability, basically to be able to install grab bars or fire alarm systems and elements as such. And also the counters, that the counters be provided within specific heights that are required under UFAS. And now, in the case for the Pensacola Area Housing Commission, we opted for providing fully accessible units, primarily because if you leave something that can be adaptable at a later date, there's also the possibility that the modifications might not be done right, and it might not be in compliance, and also going into the providing information for the consumer. So we opted for the option of providing accessible units, which ultimately will provide just the level of access that is required at this point. Okay, so different requirements as we mentioned. Okay, let's go into sinks. Basically, sinks should be no more than 34 inches above the finished floor to the top, and should have a knee clearance. And this knee clearance of 27 inches is another one of those building blocks that should be provided throughout, basically, for different elements. And we will see it at the lavatories, at the sinks inside kitchens. So, and also at many counters, if it is required to have knee clearance, this will be another one of those building blocks who have that 27-inch knee clearance. Another element that has to be accessible in these lavatories is that if they have the exposed pipes, there should have an element covering these pipes to avoid somebody either getting burned or cut by the pipes underneath the sink. So all those hot and cold water drain pipes that are there should be covered. Um, at the same time, the faucets, which many times, if we look at a lot of the older ones, are probably not something that is operable with one fist. These faucets should be operable, and all the operable parts should be operable with one hand. Basically, a closed fist should not require tight pinching, grasping, or turning of the wrist to operate. That's the general concept behind that, to avoid, to facilitate somebody utilizing these elements. Also, if there are mirrors, the mirrors should be no more than 40 inches above the finished floor to the bottom of the reflecting surface, not to the frame, but to the reflecting surface. And again, that is the maximum. So if you can design below that, by all means do so. And it gives the option of basically providing and meeting that compliance. And there are different options to comply with this also. If a mirror is too high, basically a full-length mirror can be installed within the restroom, and to meet the standard, if it will imply too much work to basically tear up existing elements or something like that. Also, cabinets within these, like medicine cabinets, should be no more than 44 inches above the floor to the top of the bottom cabinet. So that's also a requirement if some of these mirrors have those built-in cabinets in them. Okay, another requirement that, and this is one that we'll find just throughout the facilities, is for the water closets. Okay, so the water closets, and this is actually a pretty tough standard to meet, is that they should be centered at 18 inches from the wall. Okay, and the height. And here we are looking at one of the water closets that can be in the common areas. In common areas, they are allowed to go between 17 inches to 19 inches above the floor to the top of the seat. Now, within the accessible dwelling units, these are allowed to go between 15 to 19 inches above the finished floor to the top of the seat. So there's a little bit more range for the accessible water closets in the dwelling units. And the idea behind these also is to allow, number one, to install backing to allow the installation of grab bars, one on the back wall and one on the side wall. The one behind the water closet should be a 36-inch long grab bar, and it's supposed to be mounted between 33 to 36 inches above the finished floor. And the water closet on the side wall is a 42-inch long unit, and that one should go at 12 inches from the back wall and at 54 inches minimum to the front. Now, sometimes it can get a little tricky meeting the 12 inches in the back and the 54 in the front. So also the option is just installing a longer grab bar. Installing a longer grab bar will allow that. You don't have to meet that 12 exactly. You can put it a little bit closer to the wall and go even a little bit more than the 54. And again, it helps us in meeting compliance for these water closets. These water closets are required clear floor space, just like the elements, like when we mentioned that a stationary a person on a stationary wheelchair required that 30 by 48 inch. So the clear floor space for water closets is usually 60 inches wide, and depending if it is floor mounted or if it is wall mounted. If it is wall mounted, it can be 56 inches. If it is floor mounted, it has to be 59 inches. So there are certain specific space requirements for these. Generally, when you are in the bathrooms, by providing the 60-inch turning space, these clear floor space requirements will be met. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on those. Okay, another element that is necessary in these accessible bathrooms is to either have a bathtub or a shower. And looking at these bathtubs, I mean, these are some of the specific requirements for the bathtubs. Number one, they have to have the grab bars. And as you can see from the diagrams, there's grab bar on the control wall, one on the back wall, and even one on the, well, on the head wall, basically on all three walls. And depending on the type, if it's the one on top, it has to have on all the three walls. If it's the one on the bottom, the one that has the seat in the back, it does not require a grab bar basically on the head wall, because that's where somebody would sit down, and you don't want to have a grab bar obstructing that seat in the tub. Also, something that is important to note is that these have to have a seat. If it's the one that is on top, it has to have a seat, and it doesn't have to be fixed. It can be something that can be installed, but that seat does have to be able to withstand 250 pounds of pressure. So just keep in mind that if you do purchase one of these seats, or you know, right now if they're purchasing, they're there to keep them, or when purchasing new ones, that they have to withstand 250 pounds of pressure, so they won't flip over and somebody won't be injured. I mean, that is just basically, let's say, you know, like a risk factor in there. So definitely we have to keep that in mind. At the same time, the shower head. The shower head has to be 60 inches minimum, and basically that allows for, you know, a greater level of access for somebody that's using the shower than just having a fixed shower head. So that element always has to be there. Another element is the controls. The controls, you can see there's a little hatched area, or that says a dotted line that says control area. The controls have to be mounted within the top of the tub rim and the grab bar, and they have to be offset towards the wide part of the shower. That's the ideal location for somebody to go ahead and set the controls before they get into that tub and use the tub. Also, again, like the clear floor space requirements for the single stationary wheelchair space and for the water closet, the bathtub also needs at least a minimum of 30 inches next to it, expanding the entire length of the tub for somebody to be able to use it. The other element that can be provided, and this personally I think provides a greater level of access, is the shower than the bathtub. The main reason why is because a lot of times in existing construction where the restrooms inside the dwelling units are basically tight or constricted in space, installing a shower such as the one in the bottom, the 30 by 60 inch shower, allows utilizing some of the clear floor space of that shower to provide the turning space within it. So that provides definitely a greater advantage over having a bathtub. That bathtub, when there are tight configurations, does not allow that, and unless the clear floor space is provided outside of that space, you know, it basically restricts the use. Now, in the showers, they also have to have the grab bars, again, mounted between 33 to 36 inches above the finished floor, and they have to be, as you can see for the transfer shower, has to be 36 by 36 inches and has to have the grab bar on the control wall and on the side wall to allow for somebody to hold it and be able to transfer onto the seat. That transfer shower, the one that is indicated on top, has a seat which should be mounted at 18 inches above the finished floor so somebody can transfer onto it. Whereas the shower in the bottom, which is considered a roll-in shower, that one has to have grab bars on all three walls, so allowing somebody to be able to wheel into that shower. And the controls on this roll-in shower should be located on either one of the side walls, but not necessarily on the back wall. We'll see that this is another difference when we look at showers under the ADA. And these also require at least those 30 inches or 36 inches in front of them to provide the clear floor space, similar to the clear floor space for stationary wheelchairs for the water closet, for the tubs. The same applies to the rolling shower, those same building blocks. Okay. When we look at kitchens, what elements are we trying to identify? If we are looking at a Section 504 kitchen, what we are looking for primarily is that if it is a U-shaped kitchen, basically configured as enclosed on all three sides, it must have 60-inch clear floor space between opposing cabinets, walls, and appliances. So that becomes a pretty big kitchen if you think of it. Whereas if it is just a pass-through kitchen that is open on both sides, it only requires 40 inches between opposing cabinets, walls, and/or appliances. The idea also is to provide the 30-inch clear floor space that we have spoken about at each one of the appliances, you know, the washer, the dryer, the refrigerator, the range, and also a specific requirement to provide a sink that has a 30 by 48 clear floor space below it, and that is the diagram B, where it is totally clear below that, so allows somebody to approach that sink in a forward manner and have that knee clearance that we had spoken about in the past and use that sink. Now, there are specific requirements for sink that the supporting structure for these sinks should be no more than 2 inches, and the sink should be no more than 6 inches deep, and to be able to provide access. And also it can be, the height can be adjustable, you know, basically between 28, 32, and 36 are other options other than the 34, but primarily the one that is mostly utilized is the 34 inches. Now, there are also, another requirement is to provide a work surface. A work surface is where somebody can think of it, can approach, have a forward approach to the cabinet, have that knee space below the cabinet, that 30 by 48 clear floor space and be able to just chop their vegetables or anything they would like to do in their cooking process. And we're going to see some pictures of these, how these elements actually look in later on in the presentation. Cabinets can be provided below these elements as long as they are removable and the floor is provided throughout and everything is finished. So basically cabinets and walls are finished, and as well as the flooring, but they would have to be removable as well and provide instructions for the residents on how to use these elements.